Hello bookworms! Today I'm going to be doing my favorite series of all time video. We have done it. We have reached the end of my series of series videos, and what better way than to go out with a bang and talk about my favorite series of all time. I've been wanting to do this video for so long. I actually had filmed this video 2 years ago now, I want to say, and for whatever reason didn't post it because I think I was just reading other books where I was like, but this could be a favorite, but this could be a favorite. But this time around I said, you know what? I'm just gonna talk about all the series that are my favorite, and if I read new favorite series, I can just make an update video in the future. So these are all of my favorite series that I have read throughout the course of my life up until present. I will say that for the most part, these are finished series, though there are some series on my list that I consider to be all-time favorites that are not yet completed. So first and foremost, it should come as a surprise to no one because I talk about this series literally all the time, and that is the Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. This is the first book, The Name of the Wind. There's also the second book, The Wise Man's Fear. I don't love The Wise Man's Fear as much as I love The Name of the Wind, but The Name of the Wind is just one of my favorite books ever. It's one of the first like adult high fantasy books that I read, and I just completely fell in love with the prose, the style of storytelling, the amount of time that I've been able to pour into rereading this book and theorizing about what's going to happen in the third book if it ever comes out. To be honest, I'm not even bitter about the fact that we haven't gotten the third book yet because I just have such a deep love of this first book that I'm so glad that it's in my life and that I've been able to reread it and reread portions of it so many times, and that I've had the time to spend doing that without necessarily having the conclusion. It means the world to me. It's so good. The story follows our main character named Kvothe. His story is being told to a chronicler who comes to the inn that this man named Kote runs, and the chronicler wants to hear all about his history. So within the first book there are many allusions to some of the amazing things that Kvothe has done in his lifetime, some of them true, some of them not necessarily true, and the chronicler wants to get the story of his life from the source. He reluctantly agrees, and he tells him that he will tell him the story over 3 days. So each book contains 1 day of him relaying his story to the chronicler. Immediately fell in love with it. I think that Patrick Rothfuss has such an incredible way with words, and I really love all of the poetry and all of the music appreciation, and I love the main character, Kvothe. He is so funny, and he's constantly getting himself into trouble with his big mouth, but he's really good at what he does, and I just personally love reading from his perspective. He just really appeals to me on a whole lot of levels. I love the mysterious, like fairy tale-esque Chandrian story that we have going on here, and there are so many loose ends that I really am looking forward to having tied up, but just overall, I am in love with this book. So yeah, that's pretty much it. You're just getting the story of Kvothe's life and his adventures from childhood up until present, and I'm very curious what's going to happen in the present. Next on my list is the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. You have no idea how much I am struggling to hold all of these up at the moment. They are very heavy. Harry Potter has been one of my favorite series since I was a child. I'm only gonna hold one of these books. I'm dying. Harry Potter has been one of my favorite series since I was a child. It's definitely one of the series that got me the most into reading. I think everybody already knows the synopsis for Harry Potter, so I'm not gonna get into that, but this series just opened me up to so much magic, and it's really the series that got me interested in fantasy at a very young age, because prior to reading Harry Potter, the series that I were really into were Goosebumps and Sweet Valley High and Babysitter's Club, and I just didn't know that so much magic could possibly exist. So I just fell in love with this world, I fell in love with the characters, and I pretty much grew up with Harry, Ron, and Hermione. I was the same age as them while I was reading the books until there was like that gap between books 4 and 5, and then I sadly got older than them. I just love it so much. I don't really think that there's much that I can add to get you to read Harry Potter if you haven't already read it. It's a pretty iconic series and it really means a lot to me because I've had such strong ties to it since childhood. So Harry Potter, of course, you knew it was going to be on here. Now that I have the two most obvious series that I was going to talk about out of the way, the next series that I want to mention is actually a newer favorite series for me, and that is the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. I super fell in love with these books very recently. I read the first book back in 2015 and then I reread it this year and I just completely remembered how much I loved about it and questioned why I didn't continue earlier on. But I fell even more in love with The Well of Ascension and with The Hero of Ages, which I didn't think would be possible. I honestly just care so deeply for these characters, like for Vin and for Elend. Both of them mean so much to me. Their character arcs and just their journey from book 1 to book 3 are astounding. Like, I had so many feelings while I was reading this. This series has such an amazing magic system. I think the world building is just incredible. I think Brandon Sanderson did such a great job of writing such fantastic characters, and even the villains are just fantastic. Some of them I hated so much, some of them were so interesting, and then other ones I was just like, I just need you to stop. But pretty much what happens in this series is that we are following a girl named Vin, and she finds out that she is a Mistborn. So the magic system is called allomancy, and in order for people to use it, they can digest certain metals and then they burn those metals. That allows them to have some special abilities, but typically people can only burn one metal, and then anyone who can burn more than one metal, that means that they can actually burn all of the metals, and that means that they are a Mistborn, and that is a very rare breed of people. They're trying to liberate this world, and they're trying to bridge the gap between the nobles and the ska, who are like the lower class of people, and just make things better where all of them can work together and have better lives. But obviously there are a lot of people that are opposed to that. This series just has so much political intrigue. It's amazing. If you haven't read Mistborn, do it. I'm going to give up on holding full series because my arm feels like it's falling asleep. But the next series that I'm going to talk about is one that is definitely a more controversial series, but that is the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. This is one of my favorite series. I really enjoyed it from beginning to end. I do think that there were some installments in the series that were better than others, but overall, again, I just love the characters so much. And what I've come to realize, especially while I was making my favorite series of all time list, is that I tend to be a character-driven reader, and I certainly enjoy a good plot, but if I don't love the characters, I generally don't care about what's going on in the rest of the book. Throne of Glass follows Selena, who is an assassin, and there's a competition to see if she can become the king's champion, which means that she will be an assassin for the king. She's a pretty ruthless killer. One of the things that I also really loved about her is that even though she is so ruthless and so strong and everything, she's also pretty girly, which is not something that you usually see in fantasy. A lot of times, if somebody is like a great warrior, they tend to reject those kinds of feminine things, and Selena is not like that. And I just think that, again, the character arc for her from beginning to end, I think she undergoes so much growth. She definitely starts out a lot more immature in the first book, but she really comes into her own and takes responsibility for so much that happens in this series. And I just love the group that forms. They have such a great dynamic, and especially in the final book, Kingdom of Ash, there was just so much great banter between everyone. I loved it so much. The series is one that will forever be a favorite of mine. Next, we have another incomplete but very soon to be complete series, and that is the Folk of the Air series by Holly Black. I truly loved The Cruel Prince. When I first read it, was not expecting anywhere near the level of fangirling that I experienced, but I really loved this book. I think that Holly Black writes fairies just on a whole other level. She just knocks it out of the park. So again, this is another story where I think I love it so much because of the characters, but I also feel like I love it so much because of the world building. And obviously I love the world building a lot in the other series that I mentioned too, but I just think that fairy is such a magical place, so that really appeals to me. I love like anything to do with forests and nature and stuff, so I just find reading about that to be really enjoyable. The language was so descriptive that it made me kind of like transported me to the world of Elfhame, and I also really enjoyed The Wicked King. And part of the reason why I also really love this series is because to me it's reading like one giant board game. There is strategy going on, our characters each have something that they are aiming for, and everybody has some kind of plan going on, and I can't wait to find out how everything's going to like come to a head and get resolved in the third and final book. Just reading strategy is something that I so appreciate and admire, and I think that Holly Black just did such a great job crafting the motive behind these characters, and it just makes them feel so real. This series is one that everybody kind of knows about, but we're following a girl named Jude, and her parents were brutally murdered by this guy who is the father to her half-sister, and after he murders them in front of the children, he takes those children into fairy, and Jude is a human, but she's being raised in fairy, so she's definitely vulnerable to lots of tricks, but she doesn't want to be weak. She wants to be a major player in this world, and she definitely has strengths that fairies were not expecting, so it's a huge pleasure to read from her perspective. Even though she might not be the most likable character, although I really like her, I know other people have said that they don't like her, I think she's a really great character. Folk of the Air, definitely on my list. Next would be the Strange the Dreamer duology by Laini Taylor. I really enjoy Laini Taylor's prose. That is pretty much the main thing that got me really invested in these books. I really enjoyed this series much more than her first trilogy, the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy. I just think Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares were absolutely exceptional. We're following a guy named Laszlo, and he is a librarian, and he is fascinated by this city that seems to have just up and disappeared out of nowhere. No one can remember anything about it. No one can even remember the name of the city. It just is called Weep. And then one day Laszlo gets the opportunity to travel to that city. He obviously takes that opportunity up and he heads out, and then we get to find out everything that happened in this city to cause it to be forgotten from memory. But one of the things that I specifically love about this too is that Laszlo, our main character, he has a crooked nose, and the reason he has a crooked nose is because a book fell on him, because he's just constantly surrounded by books. And the way that Laini Taylor explained it is that this character is literally shaped by stories. I love stories. I love reading about the power of stories, and this series is just so beautifully done. And another thing that I also really love about it is that there's no clear villain in this story. Despite it being a fantasy story where there are two warring sides, there isn't a clear this is the good side and this is the bad side. Each side has their valid points and they need to figure out how to work together, which is something pretty unusual, I would say, for a fantasy series. My next favorite series that I want to talk about is The Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater. Again, this is one that I'm sure that no one is surprised about. I love these characters, which, as I've said, is a pretty common theme between all of these series. So I really love Gansey. He is my favorite character within this whole quartet, but I think that the friendship between all of them is so intense and I love it so much. I love how much they're all there for each other through thick and thin, no matter what, even if somebody isn't necessarily making the right choices or if they don't see what's best for them. All of the other characters are still like deeply there for them and love them and will do whatever they can to help them, even if it's not necessarily something that character can see at the time. That was really what made me connect to the series, is just that element of friendship between all of them. I think that Maggie Stiefvater captured that so well, like more well than I've seen in pretty much any other series. I will say for you guys that The Raven Cycle tends to be very polarizing. There are a lot of people that have trouble with it and can't get into it. I ended up being one of the people that loves it, and I have reread the series because I love it so much. I definitely foresee myself rereading the series again in the future. It's just a story that I love, and while I don't think that the ending of the series was the strongest, strongest. I really love books 1 through 3. It will forever be a favorite of mine. Realizing that I should have mentioned this one earlier, but another favorite series of mine is the Lord of the Rings series by J.R.R. Tolkien. I think that Lord of the Rings is just such an epic fantasy. Again, it's one that I feel like everyone kind of knows about, but it's such a classic, and it's a classic for a really good reason. I think that the books are so in-depth, and they really got me very interested in deeper, like high fantasy. I think Middle-earth is such an incredibly well fleshed out world, and I would love to visit and like just be in the Shire and drink tea and like hang out in a hobbit hole. And then on top of the book series, I love all of the films too, so I feel like that just like expanded my love for it even more. Actually planning on rereading the Lord of the Rings series in 2020. But yeah, I just love it so much. We are following Frodo and Sam and Pippin and Merry, who are the hobbits that have been tasked with taking the ring to Mordor by my favorite wizard, Gandalf, and they end up teaming up with some other people. So we've got Legolas, who is an elf, we've got Gimli, who is a dwarf, and we've got Aragorn, and yeah, it's like just amazing. It's super incredible high fantasy. I feel like I don't need to say that much about it because it's Lord of the Rings. You know that it's amazing. Next would be the A Darker Shade of Magic series by Victoria Schwab. I honestly think that each one of these books, like each book just gets better and better. This follows a guy named Kel who has the ability to travel through parallel Londons. There are 4 different Londons. There is Red London, Grey London, Black London, and White London, and each London has a different relationship with magic. Like I said, he's one of the few people that's able to travel between the worlds, though he meets someone else that also has that ability. It's just a really fun series, and again, I think this is one where I love it so much because of the characters. My favorite characters in the series are Alucard and Holland. It was honestly just a pleasure reading these books. I think that Victoria did such a great job of world building and making each London distinct from the other Londons, but also it still has that tie to actual London, so you kind of like go into it with preconceived notions, and then she just kind of shatters all of them once you get to the different places, but it feels familiar once you get into the story, so it's easier to dive into, I would say, than other fantasy worlds where you need to learn a completely new system. We also have Lila Bard, who is an incredible female character. I really enjoy her. And yeah, I truly enjoyed this series from start to finish. I think A Conjuring of Light was one of the best endings to a series that I've ever read. Next is another unfinished series, and that is Nevermore, The Trials of Morrigan Crow. This is a middle grade series that I read pretty immediately after the first book came out, and I just absolutely loved it so much, and the second book definitely lived up to the first book. I believe that Jessica Townsend said that this series is going to be about 9 books long, and I'm so here for that because it's just so great. So in this series, we're following a girl named Morrigan Crow, and Morrigan is born on the most unlucky day, and anytime that anything bad happens, like at all in her town, she's just completely blamed for it, and even though it's something that she obviously had no part in, they just think that she's unlucky because of her birth date. At the end of every month, she has to write apology letters to everyone in her town for everything that they complain about. She kind of gets swept away by this guy named Jupiter North, and he's like an older mentor type figure, and he takes her to the world of Nevermore, and she learns all about this new place that she had no idea about, and she finds out things about herself, and Jupiter's kind of like her patron or her sponsor, or I'm not sure what the word is. She moves into this like magical hotel with him where there are giant talking cats, and there's a vampire who's in charge of like event planning. It's just such a beautifully crafted world. It's so whimsical and so much fun, and I really enjoyed both of the books that she's written so far. Then another middle grade series that also makes my list is the Peter and the Starcatcher series by Dave Barry and Ridley Pearson. This is kind of a prequel series to Peter Pan. We are following Peter and his mysterious new friend Molly. They find themselves aboard a ship called the Neverland, and they are trying to protect the greatest treasure on Earth, and they have a lot of run-ins with pirates, specifically Black Stash, who is their biggest rival that they're trying to protect this treasure from. And it's just such a beautiful story, and it's really fun because I love Peter Pan. That's one of my favorite classics. So to have this beautiful story that precedes it, I found it to be a really great prequel, and also a really great way to potentially get kids to fall in love with the story of Peter Pan before necessarily diving into the classic, but to already get them invested through this series. This was also made into a Broadway play that I saw and I really loved, but this series just holds a special place in my heart. Another series that I really love is the Arc of the Cyth series by Neil Shusterman. This is another one that is not yet finished, but the third and final book is coming out very soon, and I'm really highly anticipating it. But the Arc of the Cyth series is a dystopian, which is unusual for me because I tend not to like dystopian novels, but this series I just love. And one of the reasons that I love it so much is because it's so philosophical in its nature, and despite it being a young adult novel, I don't feel like Neil Shusterman really writes down. I would say that he really keeps the writing more adult, and he really delves into all of this interesting philosophy about what it means to take a life and how someone can make that choice and why they are the qualified one to make that choice. It's really interesting. So it takes place in a world where humans have advanced in technology to the point where people just don't pass away. But in order for there to be population control, there are a group of people that are called Cyths, and they are the only people that have the ability to cause a human to actually die. So each Cyth has their own method for choosing their victims, and in this first novel we are following Rowan and Citra, who have both been taken on as apprentice Cyths, and they're learning about the process, and only one of them will potentially become a Cyth. But the world is just so fascinating, and there's obviously kind of an evil faction of Cyths, and there's a lot of conflict, and it's just handled really well, and it gets you really immersed in the world, and I can't wait to find out how it's going to conclude. The second book had such a cliffhanger. Another more recent favorite series is the Shadow of the Fox series by Julie Kagawa. This is another unfinished series, but the final book is coming out in March of 2020, which is not that far away considering that both of these came out in the summer. So I'm excited that it's going to be wrapping up kind of soon. But this book is basically an anime, and that's why the series appeals to me so much. I really loved it. It is a fantasy story, and it's heavily inspired by Japanese mythology, and it's a quest novel, and we pick up people along the way. There is a girl that is a kitsune, and she's been tasked with protecting this portion of an ancient scroll. When all of the pieces of the scroll are brought together, there is a dragon that will appear, and somebody's able to make a wish, but the power from that wish has always historically corrupted whoever has had the opportunity to make that wish, despite how well-intentioned they are. So she is trying to do everything she can to make sure that these scrolls are all kept in separate places so nobody has the opportunity to make that wish on the day where that dragon will appear. I really love it. I really love quest stories, so this one really appeals to me, and like I said, it is in anime in book form. So I wish that this could get adapted into an anime and be animated, because I would love it. It really reminds me a lot of Yona of the Dawn, and I just have such a soft spot for this series. Then I also really want to mention the Archived series by Victoria Schwab. I have not read these books in quite a while, but this series has just forever stuck in my mind as one that I love to pieces. It follows a girl named Mackenzie, and she is a keeper. So basically, once people pass away, they turn into what are called histories, and there's a giant library of histories where all of these people who are deceased, all of their stories go, but they kind of manifest as ghosts, and some of the histories tend to escape libraries here and there, so people that are keepers like Mackenzie are in charge of finding those histories and getting them to go through their door to go back into the library. There's one librarian in the series that was inspired by David Tennant from Doctor Who. He even wears the red Converse shoes, so I really enjoyed that. But I just really thought the series was so great. I do wish that we will get a third book eventually. I don't know that that will necessarily happen. And Victoria is like writing like a mad woman lately, which I love. But this series will forever be special to me because I love things that are kind of spooky and creepy and really get you like thinking. And I also really loved the romance in this book. I think it was just so good, both of these books. And I think that she handled, in the second book, in The Unbound, I think that she handled trauma really well and gave like a very accurate portrayal of what someone who went through everything that happened in this first book would go through after those events transpired. And then the last series that I want to mention, which is kind of an honorable mention at this point, but I just have this feeling that it's gonna end up being one of my favorite series of all time, and that is the Keeper of the Lost Cities series by Shannon Messenger. I literally just finished the first book in the series last night, but from beginning to end, I was completely pulled in and fascinated by the series. There are quite a few books that I have to read to catch up, but I cannot wait to do so, and I'm so excited that there are so many of them because I honestly just loved it so much. So we're following a girl named Sophie, and Sophie finds out that she is actually an elf, and she gets pulled into this fantasy world, and it's kind of like Harry Potter in the sense that she has to go through a big adjustment period, and there are people who grew up in this elven world for their entire lives, but her going there as a 12-year-old doesn't know anything about their world, so we learn about everything in the elven world through Sophie's eyes, and she ends up going to a magical elfin school called Foxfire. It's so good. The characters are fantastic. I thought, like, from beginning to end, I was just totally captivated, and I keep hearing that the series gets better and better with each book, which blows my mind because I loved the first one so much already to begin with, so I just cannot wait to read more of them. I think that this was like such a great intro, and there's so much more that I need to know, so I can't wait to read more. But that's why this one is an honorable mention, because I truly think that it is going to be a favorite series of all time. I'll keep you guys updated on that, but I like just know it in my heart. So those are all of my favorite series of all time. There were quite a few of them on this list because I've never made one of these videos before, and if I ever make one in the future, it will definitely be shorter. So yeah, let me know what some of your favorite series of all time are. Let me know if you enjoy any of the ones that I mentioned, and that's all that I have for this video, and I'll see you guys soon in a new one. Bye!